Hello, lovely people. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for being patient with this delay. I really, really appreciate it so much. Shout out to Ikar for hosting us and helping with everything. And shout out to BB's Bakery and Cafe, no relation to the Prime Minister, for the really delicious food. Thank you, Halachic for organizing this series of Yomiyuns that this is part of. Shout out especially to Halachic board member and all-around awesome person, Caroline Morganti, who's I've been working with a lot on this, and shout out to our awesome Noah Weinrich as well. And a special thank you to our awesome speakers, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, Rabbi Arya Cohen, and Alona Weimer. Shout out to Alona also for this laptop. So today we are gathered for a Jewish reckoning with power. So one of my favorite quotes is this one from Armin Tati Roy. The only dream worth having is the dream that you will live while you are alive and die only when you are dead. To love, to be loved. Never forget your own insignificance. Never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you. To seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair. To never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple. To respect strength, never power. Above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget. Every aspect of this dream, especially the aspiration to respect strength, never power, is part of many different cultural and religious traditions, including the Jewish tradition. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, said the Lord of hosts to the prophet Zechariah. I think we are supposed to learn several things from this. That there is such a thing as brute force, devoid of justice and compassion, which is what might and power mean in this verse. And there is also God's spirit, which is strong and just and compassionate. And God's spirit is better and greater and infinitely greater than brute force. And we should live by loving and cleaving to and emulating God's spirit, and not by using or celebrating brute force. This is a lesson I and many, many other people have learned from the Jewish tradition. And yet, there's one thing that is very clear to us now, is that Judaism can also be distorted into a justification for brutality. So how should we respond to this? How should we resist all forms of brutality and abuse of power? And how do we ultimately build a world that recognizes that all people are created in the image of God, no exceptions, and that the use of brutality and oppression against any person is unjust and is an affront to God? So I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, who will help us answer these questions. Chaim Seidler-Feller has been associated with Hillel for over 50 years and has celebrated 40 years of working with students and faculty as the executive director of the Yitzhak Rabin Hillel Center for Jewish Life at UCLA, who's currently director emeritus. Chaim completed a master's in rabbinic literature and was ordained in 1971 at Yeshiva University, where he was a student of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He's been a lecturer in the departments of sociology and Near Eastern languages and cultures at UCLA and in the Department of Theological Studies at Loyola Marymount University. He is the founding director of the Hartman Fellowship for Campus Professionals. He's a faculty member of the Shalom Hartman Institute and of the Rexner Heritage Foundation. He's an organizer with A Land for All, great group, check them out, and Small Emuni, Faithful Left, also a great group, check them out too. In 2014, he initiated a fact-finding mission for non-Jewish student leaders to Israel and the Palestine Authority, which is now offered on 90 campuses. He's authored most recently of The God of Possibilities from Being to Becoming, Twas the Best of Times, Twas the Worst of Times, Anti-Semitism, Israel, and the Politics of Resentment on the Campus Today, and A Return to a Zionism for the Future. Read these books. The International Hiller Center granted Chaim the Hill Professional Recognition Award for blending the love of Jewish tradition with the modern intellectual approach of the university. I can say from personal experience, he definitely does that. And in 2020, he was presented with a Best Script, which is an academic publication honoring a respected scholar during their lifetime entitled Swimming Against the Current, Reimagining Jewish Tradition in the 21st Century, essays in honor of Chaim Seidler-Feller. He has also been a consultant to Barbara Streisand during the making of the film Yonto. Today, he will speak to us about power, morality, and the future of Zionism.
Thanks. Thank you, Eliana. Okay. So I hope everybody can hear me. You can all hear me. Okay. So I'm going to try to maintain that level. And let me tell you what I want to do in the time that we have, and hopefully we'll be able to have some questions. We have an hour, okay? I'm going to please make sure that I adhere to my limitations. It's actually what I'm talking about. It's all about restraint, you know. So yeah, that we all need reminders. Right. So what I want to do is I want to start with just a few minutes of what I would call some show and tell about the perversities of the exercise of power in contemporary Israel. This sort of inclination, this embrace of Sparta as a framework for expression of Jewish politics, and then I want to move, which most probably will occupy the majority of our time, to a biblical episode, which is sort of a model for the whole, or a framework for the discussion, which is the rape of Dinah and the response of Shimon and Levi. So that you have a precedent in the Bible for a terrorist response and for a justification of military action that serves as a framework in contemporary Israel. In fact, what struck me years ago and shocked me, in the 90s, I was reading Nikuda, which is a journal that was published by the Settler Journal. Do they still publish? I don't know, but it was one of the reasons that I read it was that it was the most interesting ideological journal that was being published in those days. I thought that sort of secular Zionism didn't have much that was sort of pushing the edges, and the religious Zionists, the settler religious Zionists, the Messianists, they had an ideology that they were fighting for, and there were interesting, if not very troubling things that emerged in their discussions, including the fact that for the first time in my life, and maybe I was sheltered, I went to yeshiva, in yeshiva, we didn't hear any positive assessments of Shimon and Levi's sort of terrorist response. We'll come to this in a moment, right? The first time that I read a positive, affirming response was in Nikuda. That is, the settlers saw the vengeance of Shimon and Levi to be a precedent for their behavior, and as if and they interpreted the episode in a positive manner. We'll see in a moment how that goes. And what's actually even more troubling to me is that the justification spread beyond the normal circles of the settlers. All right, so I want to deal with that, and then of course, if we have some time, we'll see some voices of restraint that I want you to hear. And that's really what I've been focusing on when I think about the future of Israel, or the future of Zionism. I just published an article in the Hartman Sources journal. It's an abridgment of a longer piece that I've written, where I talk about a return to what I call a return to a Zionism for the future. And the return is based on reclaiming the tradition of the founders of religious Zionism, who were not only moderates, but understood very well the potential evils of nationalism and of the embrace of power. And that was a focus of their writing. We lost that. We lost that tradition. If people ask me at what point did we lose that? We lost that. If it existed in some way, and it did, and we can see, we lost it in 1967. And that voice became almost silent, maintained by small groups of religious intellectuals, tried to hold on to that tradition and respond. That's how I hold on to Israel and Zionism through the teachings of those founders and those rabbis. Among them, you'll see quote from Rabbi Tamaris is correct, Tamaris, and Rabbi Amiel. Rabbi Amiel has become a sort of a hero of mine. He was a chief rabbi of Tel Aviv between 1935 and 1945. His writings are readily available. He was a great darshan. He was a great homileticist. And when he won the election in 1935, he beat out two slouches, there were two opponents. There were three people running for office. The other two were Rabbi Herzog, who later became the chief rabbi of Israel, and no less than Rabbi Soloveitchik. So Amiel himself represented a very strong tradition. I mean, he came from that Lithuanian background, the same background as Soloveitchik. Right? His teacher was Soloveitchik's grandfather. So he was immersed in the Talmudic tradition, in the rational tradition, and he came equipped with a very strong moral center. That's what really is someone who understood that the centrality of ethics to religious life in Judaism. That's what I'm looking for, right? And that's represented by the founders of religious Zionism. All right. So first, a little bit of what I call the horror show. I have to begin with the right pile here. See where they are. Hold on 1 second. Here it is. Okay. So this appeared in a newspaper. A young person holding out his arm with an Israeli flag, and underneath the flag it says God of Israel. Now I don't know how you react to that. What does it mean? What does it mean? The flag is the state of Israel, right? Is what's being worshipped. That's the God of Israel. Right? And in fact, it's a very accurate portrayal of what's happened in the Orthodox community. The Orthodox community has sort of, in some ways, it's jettisoned God in favor of nationalism.
You know where that's from?
I have the original. It was in the newspaper. I don't know whether I found the clipping. All right. That's number one. Number two. 2 and 3, and these are sort of relatively minor, but these are patches that were attached to soldiers' uniforms who are fighting in Gaza. So one patch is, it's very hard for you to see, but there's a crown, and underneath the crown it says Mashiach. This is the Chabad patch, all right? And many soldiers attach this patch to their uniform. I don't know numbers. We're not talking about huge numbers, but it was introduced, right? And the other patch is Eretz Yisrael Hashlema. Now, it's illegal for a soldier to attach any patch. I mean, it's true in any army and all over the world. No, you can't tamper with the institutional dress, right? And yet this was going on, and there are obviously rabbis and people who are able to intrude on the lives of the soldiers and influence them in this direction. And clearly they're being influenced to believe that they're fighting religious war. That's part of the problem. That's what's happening now. Israel never claimed that it was fighting a religious war. In fact, I would say that the more rational political leadership understood the dangers of fighting a religious war, even though, they danced around it all the time. And I think that Ariel Sharon himself provoked this type of religious war, but that's another question. All right. The next sort of advertisement, which appeared in Haaretz, was an advertisement of a bakery. The bakery had on its what do you call these things? These are they Napoleons or whatever? There's Tenu Litzahal Lekaseach. What's the kaseach? To mow. It's about let Sahal mow the lawn. On food. I mean, all right. This is how you feed. Literally, you feeding the people extremism, and they're internalizing the extremism in what they eat. And then finally, and this to me sort of really takes the cake in a way from a religious perspective. You have a soldier using his bayonet as a yad, and it was raised as a question for Rabbi Aviner to decide. And Rabbi Aviner quotes all the sources, quotes the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat about not going out with that whether arms are an adornment or not. And the Shulchan Aruch and so on, and he comes to the conclusion not terrible. It's not terrible. Even, and that the Mishnah, which talks about not going out with arms on Shabbat, as the Mishnah indicates, that's messianic, and it has nothing to do with our contemporary times. In contemporary times, neshek, armament, is essential, and it's what we wear as in a regular mode, and it's not an offense. I mean, to me, it's sort of horrifying, and I don't know how you feel, and it's something that we don't talk about. How do you feel about going to a synagogue where people enter on Shabbat carrying their guns? It used to be that I understood that if you had to carry a gun on Shabbat, the guns were deposited at the entrance or in a special place. But these days, wearing guns is literally adorned. It's part of the regular dress. We've sort of reverted to the Middle Ages, where you carry a sword all the time. And instead of understanding the potential progress that we might have made in the 20th century about militarism, we sort of are regressing in our re-embrace of militarism and power as the mode of expression. Oh, this is sort of my little horror show. Sorry. We can put it aside, I think. Let me see. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a couple of more displays here. This really, because you see how this progresses and what it induces. So I found also the following: a tefillah that was composed by Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, who was a Sephardic chief rabbi, for a soldier to recite before he goes to war. I never read anything like this. L'shem yichud kudsha b'ruchus. Okay, so it's like Hareini muchan lekayem mitzvat aseh min haTorah. I'm hereby prepared to fulfill the following mitzvah of the Torah. What's the mitzvah? L'chbosh et haaretz v'liyeshev ba, to conquer the land and to settle the land. So this is now introduced as a daily recitation by a soldier in the Israeli army. A couple of years ago, when I was in Israel, on Fridays I generally buy Mikor Rishon, because even though Mikor Rishon, I mean, it's a right-wing newspaper. First of all, I generally believe you have to read what people are saying, but every once in a while you get a surprise. So I buy the paper that Friday, and out falls a brochure, and the brochure is entitled Hagira Miratzon. This is the program that we have to deal with. I mean, I could actually stop here and tell you this is what you need to contend with. This means voluntary emigration. This is Smotrich's program. It's outlined. The government has seen it, and the latest assessment is this is what's going on now in Gaza. The board, I think you saw the news that the Israelis have extended the ground of their occupation in Gaza. What is it now to? Was it 70%? Okay, so and it's in service of this program. Okay, so this has some sort of institutional backing, programmatic and governmental backing. And then maybe I'll stop this little introduction with a quote. No, there are a couple of quotes that I need to share with you. One by Rabbi Aviner, who will reappear again. Aviner is very significant. He's a leading student of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook. He founded the yeshiva called Ateret Kohanim. It has a new name now, but it's the yeshiva that has prepared all the garments that are to be worn by the priests in the Third Temple. And although there are times where he has sort of resisted the impulse to embrace violence, nevertheless, he writes as follows. I mean, this to me is really striking. The question, he has a mode of responding to religious questions online with 2 or 3 line answers, and he's always available. So he writes as follows. Question: Ha'im ha'erech haruchani shel Eretz Yisrael yoter gadol me'erech shel shalom b'chayei adam? Is the spiritual value of the land of Israel greater than the value of peace and the life of a human being. All right, so territory trump human life. Tshuva, answer. Anu tzrichim lashevet ba'aretz gam b'mchir milchama. We have to settle the land even at the price of warfare. Yetera mizo, even more than this. Afilu yehei shalom. This I never heard before. Even if there's peace. Anu tzrichim lizom milchemet shichrur kedei l'chbosh ota. Even if there's peace, we're obligated to wage a war to introduce lizom and initiate a war to liberate the land in order to conquer it. This is sort of straight out of the book of what Holy Land is. Eliada defines Holy Land. One of the components of a land being holy is that you've spilled blood for it, that you've conquered it. You have to invest the land with your being. And then when you invest the land with your being, you can't give it up because you're in the land itself. I mean, that's what we're talking about here to this extent. And I never saw someone say we have to actually initiate a war in order that the land should be conquered. Tzvi Yehuda doesn't exactly say this, but he intimates that it's always a commandment to conquer the land. Even when we dominate, we need to be conquerors in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Which really means you have to uproot the population from the land. So that's part of the process that's being played out these days. And the last thing that I'm going to share with you in this section, if I can actually find it, here it is, was written by Rabbi Lowenstein. Now, Rabbi Lowenstein is one of the rabbis who's had an impact on the Gaza war itself. He assessed the Gaza war as a very positive experience. I don't know whether you know this, that from the perspective of religious Zionism, of the extremists, of the settlers, the war in Gaza is an opportunity. It's a grand opportunity to finally expel the Palestinians. Right? So Lowenstein writes as follows. Anu tzrichim ein anu tzrichim להתבייש במלחמה al chayenu shalanu. We don't have to be embarrassed in this battle by our lives. Mishum shema'amad chayenu ba'olam hu or ha'olam. Our status in the world, our living status in the world is to be the light for the entire world. La'am Yisrael, to the people of Israel, yesh yi'ud, there is a mission. We have an assignment. Shel hofa'at hatov hamusar Elohi le'enoshut kula. To reveal, to make manifest the good and the moral and the divine morality to humanity, to all of humanity. So we don't have to worry about our behavior because we have a role to play in fulfilling God's presence, bringing God's presence into the world through our action. And our action, our conquest, is a way of manifesting God's power. Understand that. When we win, then we demonstrate that God is great. When we occupy, we show that God is dominant. When we express power, we show that providence is present and working for us. I mean, it's a theological, this is a classic type of theological move to justify violence and power. Because God depends on our sort of manifestation of God's will in the world through our behavior. Wow. Total. All right. Any questions about this? I mean, are we ready to? I don't. When I read this, I sort of shake a little bit. You know, I don't. You know, I don't know if I'm naive. I wasn't raised with this. I didn't hear this. Now, you know, all right, I don't want to waste time, but I think what we should know is that even in the 50s, this is some research that was done. The core group that formed Gush Emunim, the settler movement, was already had their own sort of organization, which is called Gachelet. Gachelet, right? So they're the Coles, the the embers, right? No, not embers, the sparks. They were the spark. And when they met, they discussed the following. Our parents, who are religious Zionists and who are moderates, have been forced to compromise with the secular Zionists. But the day will come when we will be in charge, and then we'll be able to realize our program. So to me, this is an educational issue. How have we educated young religious people about the politics of the state of Israel? And what framework have we used in order to present this? And so it seems, and have young religious Zionists been educated at all to the notion of restraint? Or on the contrary, is it the following, and the psychological dimension? We've been beaten down, not only by others, we've been beaten down by our own leaders who don't accept our religious worldview. When the time comes, we'll be able to show them. Now, I saw this again. This is a small matter, but look in your shiurim. Many of you are familiar with Art Scroll, right? Well, so when I grew up in as I said, in Borough Park, went to yeshiva. In our shiurim, Aleinu l'shabeach did not include this line that they bow down to emptiness and vanity. Shehem mishtachavim lehevel varek. Now we learned later on that it was censored and so on. I always quote this line from Heschel. Heschel said once, or someone attributed this to Heschel, that sometimes the censor did us a favor, which I think it's a good line. But all of a sudden, you began to see this line reappear in Aleinu. It's printed in the what's Shlomo Tal's Siddur? But the Shlomo Tal, the Israeli Siddur that's used. I forget. Anyway, it's printed in the Israeli Siddur, and it's printed, and Sachs printed it in his version. I actually confronted him about it because Sachs, the claim was this is going to be the modern Orthodox Siddur. So he told me that in the next version it's going to be in parentheses. That's not very helpful, right? Not at all. And no one's written on this. And I just wonder if you trace this, is it not true that the line reappears after 1967? And that what it's about is, before 1967, we couldn't say that, right? Because we were still wary. We hadn't achieved our status as a power in the world, right? And the reason that we didn't recite that line is that we were sort of embarrassed, to say something like that. They bow down to emptiness and vanity, and who are we, the Jews, to say something like that? But now we are victors. We don't have to worry any longer about what they think about us. When it depends on what Darkei Shalom is. Is Darkei Shalom that the modes of peace with which we interact with the rest of the world? Is that because we're scared of anti-Semitism, and therefore we have to be peaceful in the way in which we treat other people? And therefore, when we are weak, we don't at all challenge them. So we don't say they bow down to emptiness and vanity, because we have to keep our mouths shut. But when we're victorious, we don't have to worry about what they think about us, because we'll beat them. So we can say whatever we want. So is this what's happening now to Judaism? But we were weak, we were oppressed. Now we have power, and now we're going to behave like everybody else. If this is what's been introduced, right? And I'm afraid that is the reality. Now, how did we behave in the past? Let's look at the sources. All right, let me take my sheet here, and we'll start.
You have about a little more than half an hour.
Okay, and we'll cover it all. Okay, so the first, I do want to read Rabbi Soloveitch's quote. I'll do the reading, and if you have questions while I'm reading, please raise your hand. All right. So the reason I want to read this is that sometimes I feel when I do this that we read Soloveitchik, we don't have to read anything else, because it really says it all. He said this in 1958. This was in a public lecture that he delivered. And it's on tape. You can listen to it. I've transcribed, the transcription that I've made is a lot longer. So this is an abridgment that someone else made. All right, it reads as follows. The Jew has experienced persecution and brutality. We never had a state. We never had political power. What if we had been a state in the Middle Ages? How would we have acted? Just like the feudal lords? Or would we have acted differently because of Jewish values? Who knows? Now with the state of Israel, the test has come. We are facing the test. Will we behave like any other state ethically? Will we restrain ourselves from engaging in certain injustices, practices which are in conflict with basic Jewish value, ethics? Or will we yield to temptation? Now, what's the test? Aside from what he says, that the test is, will we behave? I want to know deeper. What's he saying? What's the test about the state of Israel? How does it test us? In what way? And it tests all of us. All of us. Anyone want to say what's it testing? Yes?
All things we said that we're wrong, and the other people are doing them to us. Are we still getting, and we remember they're wrong, remember that we do them to other people?
Right. So what is it? What is it testing? What, how are we educated? We all went to Hebrew school, day schools. What do they teach us? They taught us the centrality of
about the world, what's going on, making the world a better place.
So the test is, does Judaism work? You know, if there is a justification for the existence of the state of Israel, this is it, the test. That is, when we lived in diaspora, we didn't have the power or the ability necessarily to act on our principles because we were subjects. So we could create a moral community, but our moral community didn't extend beyond our own value. Now we're in control. We're in political control, and there are other people who are living among us. So all those verses that we read, which we hold to be so holy about the stranger, which seems to be part of almost the goal of Torah, to sort of introduce this idea that we have to be compassionate to the stranger. Now we have to see, does it really happen? Do we do what it says, or do we do what everybody else does? And that all these teachings are irrelevant when push comes to shove. Yes, question.
There are more poignant tests, because if we're talking about, is the state of Israel going to be guided by Torah? That's saying that those citizens of the state who are not Jewish are, ipso facto, don't have the same status because Torah doesn't bind them in the same way. I mean, can there be a Torah-driven state that is also democratic to all of its citizens?
All right. So first of all, it depends on how you read Torah. If you read Torah literally, you're in trouble. But you're in trouble. I think you're in trouble Jewishly. Who heard of reading Torah literally? You know, right? You know who reads Torah literally? You know who reads Torah literally? The settlers. They read that. They are true fundamentalists. They are reading the Torah like Christian theologians, like sort of in a classic Christian way. That's the irony. Torah is filtered through rabbinic discussion. Yeah. And so that's we have to get to that. Okay. So and in general, I have my own test regarding, or judgment regarding, religious tradition. All traditions, whether religious, political, right, have what I call teachings, or it's not my phrase, texts of terror. The text of terror exists. I don't get shocked by, you gotta kill all the people. I mean, the question is, what is the interpretive tradition? How does it respond? Does it recognize the immorality? Does it open a discussion about the immorality? And I have to say that I'm grateful that my tradition gives me the ability to have that discussion. And we'll see right here in Shem, in the Reikot Dina, that early on the Ramban, I mean, it's not the Torah already responds. You have this discussion already in the Torah about the morality of the response of Shimon and Levi. Okay? Yes.
The other possibility is that Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, is designed to work in exile. Not as a sovereign.
Uh-huh, all right, so you want, all right, so you're a Spinozist, anyway,
Spinoza was a Zionist.
well, was Zionist, it's possible, yeah, I mean, look, you know, as we look at history, I mean, as I do, we see history in some ways building on itself. And so I never imagined that what's intended is for us to revert back to this sort of earlier form when Judaism has gone through this development. It's not, it's very different from what it was. And in terms of how it developed, why would we want to give up what we've learned over 2,000 years? Not only that, there's something that there's a whole other discussion, the next conference, to understand the value of what's come about because of our exilic experience. Has our exilic experience complemented our national experience in a way that it's allowed us to develop a worldview that's distinctive? That's what's difficult about being, it seems to me, about realizing about this moment, because it requires really that we have to focus on a sort of a counter psychological mode of behavior. Because the normal psychological mode of behavior is, if you are beaten up, you want to beat up the people who beat you up. Let's say we're being a human. Let's start with being a human being, not only being the Jew. What being a human being is, it gives us the ability to restrain ourselves. In other words, not to be just instinctual. We're not just instinctual. I know that there are certain political leaders who appear to only act according to their instincts, but I don't think that's human. In other words, so it's not just about being Jewish. It's about overcoming the impulses that we have, the normal impulses to violence and to vengeance, which clearly was a natural mode, and the Torah is constantly conscious of it in the way it deals with Goel Hadam, right? I mean, you see that there's an awareness that we need to place some, as constantly refer, some restraints. All right, so I'm not giving up on rabbinic Judaism. Okay, all right. So how much time do we have? So let's take a look at. So you're familiar. Everybody familiar with the episode in Shem that about Dina goes out. She's raped by Hamor, and there's an encounter between the families, between Jacob's family and the Shechemites, and an arrangement is made that because the Shechemites want to welcome Jacob's family and integrate them into their Canaanite setting, and the Jacob's family proposes what should we call it? I'm missing the word. A trick. What's the word? A trick. Right? A subterfuge. Right? And indicating that the families can mix. All that's required is that the Shemites circumcise. Once they circumcise, the families will be able to be mixed. I mean, that's the object here. And it's attractive. It's attractive to both, because Jacob's family is looking for some normalization and integration, and the Shemites are looking for the introduction of some, I guess, maybe there's some economic benefit to having this tribal chieftain bring his family into the community, and we can grow together. On the third day, which we were all taught was the day of the. I don't recall my own experience, but they say that it's the hardest day after circumcision, the third day. Shimon and Levi, two of the brothers come, and they kill all the males in the town. They take the women captive, and they kill all the males in the town. And Jacob's reaction. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So if you look at verse 30 on page 2, so Jacob's reaction is, "Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon veLevi, achartem oti lahavisheni b'yoshev haaretz." You have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. In other words, it's an instrumental critique. You've endangered us. And he didn't say you did something unethical. You violated the principle of Judaism or of God's law. You killed people. It's a horror. You've taken lives. No, you've threatened our survival by your behavior, right? You've making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, making our family, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My fighters are few in number, that is our group, our family, so that if they unite against us, me, and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. The response of the brothers, but they answered, should our sister be treated like a whore? As they set out a terror from God. Okay, so that's their response. The brothers respond with those three words, and that they have a moral argument. What's their moral argument? What's the basis of the argument? What's the justification of their behavior? Why do we engage in terror?
Honor.
Honor, all right, but they're saying more. There's honor, exactly. Honor is one factor, but there's something more.
We're being degraded by our sisters.
All right, but it's an argument that you have in contemporary politics, the argument of deterrence. So in other words, if they do it now, they'll continue to abuse us, and we have a right. That's why this episode figures in the discussion in 1953 of the terror of the response of Ariel Sharon's troop of 101 whatever in Kibbutz, the massacre in Kibbutz. All right, which we'll come to in a moment, because this is looked upon as a precedent. That's why I told you before that this is really important. The Bible lives in a way in which it sort of creates a framework in which we can understand and reflect on contemporary events. So here we have an incident in which the family of Jacob determined that they had to fight against the locals in order to prevent further abuse of their community. And they try to justify their behavior on those grounds. However, later in life, when Jacob is blessing his children before he dies, so Jacob says the following. I'll read the English. Simeon and Levi are a pair. You see the next source, 3. Shimon and Levi achin. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. This doesn't sound instrumental any longer, meaning he's making a judgment on the moral actions of the two brothers. Let not my person be included in their counsel. I don't want my name in any way to be sullied by any association with my sons. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, what do? They kill people, they slay men. And when pleased, they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, meaning scatter them in Israel, meaning I will not give them any territory. Right? So Shimon gets a very small territory, and eventually the tribe sort of disappears from the tribal accountings later on in prophets, and Levi gets no territory at all. Now I'm not going to read this to you, but Yoram Chazoni, right? Actually, I should read it to you because it's striking when I say that contemporary politics plays a role here. So Chazoni writes the following. When Jacob responds with what today would be considered a pro-peace argument, and pro-peace in quotation marks, so the cynicism, it's sort of, sometimes you read something and it sort of right away you feel it's unctuous. The pro-peace argument, that is a willingness to sacrifice one's integrity or concern for justice for the sake of avoiding conflict. In other words, the only reason that Jacob proposed this pro-peace argument at the end of his life was, that he wanted to avoid it. He wanted to avoid, not because he had any principles. The principles of justice are fighting, are representing the honor of your community. The rogue brothers retort that the family's honor and the punishment of evildoers are principles that far outweigh Jacob's political concerns. So that's actually responding to the first argument that Jacob makes, and the practical argument. If the peace between the peoples was ruined, it was the rapist and his cohorts, not the victims, who were to blame. If the Gazans are dying, if men, women, and children are being killed, don't dare to place any blame on in the hands of the Israelis. It's all the fault of Hamas and the Palestinian people themselves. They brought it upon themselves. That's the argument. And the scriptural account goes on to vindicate the brothers, right? I didn't read you the verse because in the account early on, the next chapter says that the people of the land were fearful of Jacob's family, meaning the deterrence worked. So that's what Chazoni is grounding this, and he says, and they traveled, and the terror of God was upon the neighboring cities, and they did not pursue the children of Jacob. Not only did Simeon and Levi ensure that justice was carried out and the family's dignity maintained, but their uncompromising action went much further in preventing conflict and neutralizing the threat of war than Jacob's policy of appeasement. Policy of appeasement. All right, understand, this is what we're up against. Those people who want compromise, who want settlement, right? They're appeasers. That's how they're being classified. The security that the family of Jacob suddenly enjoyed, which enabled them to travel freely. Now listen to this phrase. This really blew me away. Right?
15 minutes.
Right. We talked about, I know, but this is it. You see how dirty it is. It's not just, all right. What?
Still Hazoni.
This is Chazoni. Yeah, so you see that it's not simply that it's a deterrence, he says, that not only enables them to travel freely and accumulate wealth. Wow. I mean, the cynicism here, the capitalism. So, I mean, that's a question. I mean, I must say, I'm a little bit less radical than Aryeh. But is there a link between the capitalistic impulse and the violence? I mean, in other words, is that it's so striking. I mean, there's no embarrassment. That's what he should be embarrassed about. If you're talking about embarrassment, it's embarrassing that it's so vulgar. Right? What the brothers achieved, they killed the town, all the men in the town. They got us security, but also they let us settle the land so that we could prosper and be successful. It was due precisely to the strength demonstrated by the brothers in defending the purity and honor of God's chosen and of God himself by extension, right? So God is honored. God's honor is brought about by Israel's success. Not only when we're secure and when we are wealthy, that shows that God is honored. Now, Tzvi Yehuda Cook in one of his texts says, God's honor is demonstrated when we have a national entity. When we don't have a national entity, God's honor is diminished in the world. This is sort of paganism, right? Where your honor as a nation and God's honor only. And if you're victorious, that speaks well about your God. And we have a theology. We have an amazing theology. It's very difficult. You tell me, what's the classic line in Jewish teaching about power and about courage, right? Ezehu Gibor, HaKadosh Yitzro. So there's a famous Gemara in Masechet Yuma about the fact that the Anshe Knesset Hadolah was it they who they returned the glory to Israel because we stopped reciting Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vahanorah. In our Amida, we stopped referring to God as the brave, courageous, and powerful one and wondrous one. Because why? Because we suffered. Because we were interpreting history theologically, which is a mistake, right? In other words, that's, I think, the rabbi's teaching here. History is one thing, and then our theology transcends our historical experience, right? So what do the Anshe Knesset Hadolah teach? Explain. Why is God great? Where is God's greatness? Where is God's power? God's power is in God's restraint. It's not only that the rabbis taught us Ezehu Gibor HaKodesh. It's not just for humans. Humans have to reflect. It's a type of imitatio Dei. God himself restrains itself, God itself restrains God's self from avenging the violence that's extended towards God's people in an attempt to promote and hope for understanding, and that the violence will not just continue cyclically, right? By God restraining himself. So that contrary to the ancient mode, which is that God's greatness is expressed by the people of God being victorious, God's greatness is expressed in the world by the people of God demonstrating compassion. Wow. I mean, this is, sort of counterintuitive, counter-Nietzschean, counter the way of the world. Is it possible to carry that burden? What I would say is the following. I'm going to say something practical. I'm not asking the Israeli government to institute what I'm teaching as policy. That's not where I'm going. Because I'm not a politician, and I would be a terrible politician. In other words, that what I'm looking for is that this voice be considered in the deliberations of a political of a government, of a political entity. In other words, we have a tradition. How can it get factored into the discussions and in the decision making? Does it in some ways, can it influence? Can it in some way push back against the general impulse that's made by tacticians who think in different terms from the ones in which we're thinking? Does it have some valence in the contemporary conversation of those who are governing and of those of us in our own community who are thinking about our future? So and unfortunately, I don't think that this sentiment is presented at all. Now, who expressed this most clearly? And that was Yeshayahu Leibowitz. So let's take a look and see what Leibowitz has to say, and then we'll call it. I'll come to a conclusion. So first of all, that you should know, the Ramban, Nachmanides, who there's no question in my mind that Nachmanides loved the land of Israel. The thing about Nachmanides is that he was an ethically driven rabbinic thinker. So even though he, in some of his interpretations, I think there's a type of extremism in terms of valuing the value of the land as divine from a mystical perspective. Nevertheless, he was restrained by his ethical commitments. So he's critical. He's able to be critical of the behavior of Shimon and Levi. What the Ramban says is very simple. Dinah was a captive. She was raped. If anybody deserved to be punished, it was the rapist. And what should the brothers have done? The brothers should have retrieved Dinah, right? They didn't have to kill the entire town in order to free Dinah. So so clearly they killed innocents, and they have to be held responsible for killing innocents. All right. Now Leibowitz is source number 9. Source number 9. Source number 8, by the way, by Shaul Yisraeli. Right. So he's writing both Leibowitz and Shaul Yisraeli are writing in the aftermath of the Kibbutz massacre in 1953. By the way, not dealt with very well. Ben Gurion had a public press conference in which he announced that the 69 innocent women and children, mostly, who were killed in the village of Kibbutz, right, who were in some way by a military act in an unannounced way for no apparent reason other than the fact that there had been a terrorist incident two days before, supposedly traceable to this area, and the Israelis wanted an act of military deterrence, exactly like Shimon and Levi, right? So Ben Gurion announced to the world that the killing of the 69 innocents was perpetrated by Israeli civilians who were Holocaust survivors, and therefore were so emotionally challenged by the experience of terrorists crossing the border, because in the early 50s, there were many Fedayeen crossing the border from Jordan, and there were Israeli civilians who were killed, numbers of them. So they were so taken by it that they took the law into their own hands. They're the ones who killed. There was no willingness to deal with the effort with what was a terrorist act, a massacre on the part of an Israeli troop. And we have the order that Sharon gave, for Sharon was also acting only upon government order, that you should kill anyone who's moving around, although they hadn't been warned beforehand, and there was no violation on the part of anybody in that village. So there's a response to Kibya. The response is international. And Yeshayahu Leibovitz writes a very important article after Kibya, and you also have, to my mind, I think, an equally important public column written by Leon Roth, someone, Chaim Yehuda Roth, who most of you don't know about, unfortunately. He was the brother of Cecil Roth, the great British Jewish historian. He established the philosophy department at the Hebrew University with Shmuel Yudel Bergman. He and Bergman engaged in the master project of translating the classics into Hebrew. I mean, they had a whole crew. They did it. They created what was the possibility of Jewish reflection, philosophical reflection at the Hebrew University. And in 1953, he picked up and he left Israel. And this is why. Kibya is not the only reason that he did something. And he never explained why. He had come in the 20s. Magnus invited him to establish the philosophy department. So he was a patriot. He was a lover. He was an ethicist. And I think he's among those writings we have to return. And he actually, contrary to Leibovitz, he believes that there is such a thing as Jewish ethics. Leibovitz doesn't believe there's Jewish ethics. He believes there's universal ethics. But by the way, universal ethics are okay. That's the thing. But somehow we feel that if it's not Jewish, then it's not legitimate, right? That's the whole point here. And Rav Kook, the father, understood that universal ethics have value. But even he never rejected them in the way in which the students of Yehuda did. So Leibovitz writes the following. Kibya, its causes, implications, and the action itself are part of the great test to which we as a nation are put as a result of national liberation, political independence, and our military power. For we were bearers of a culture which for many generations derived certain spiritual benefits from conditions of exile, foreign rule, and political impotence. Our morality and conscience were conditioned by an insulated existence in which we could cultivate values and sensibilities that did not have to be tested in the crucible of reality. All right, so what's he saying? He's expanding our notion of the test. I said that Soloveitchik is telling us that it's a test of Judaism. By the way, we didn't read the end of Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik says that the future of Jewish history is going to be interpreted by the behavior of the state of Israel over the next 50 years. This he says in 1958. That's how he ends his statement. Jewish history will be interpreted on the basis of how Jews behaved in the state of Israel. Right? And we're actually seeing that right now. So Leibovitz expands the test. What's he saying? Look. When we were in exile, we didn't face any moral dilemma because the choices were between good and evil. Now, with the choice between good and evil, there's no test because there's only one choice. If you have if you have a religious outlook, if you have a moral outlook, and that's to do what's ethical. The test comes when there's a conflict between values, and there's a value of the ethics of how you treat another human being, and then there's it's in conflict with another value, which is your security, and security is itself significant. Then you have to make a choice. So he presents Kibya as such a struggle. says, this is about our maturation as a people. Before we had a state, we didn't have to make moral choices because there was only one choice that we needed to make, and that was we were taught by our teachers. We went to Hebrew school. We knew that we had to treat the stranger with compassion. Now that we have a state, there's a competing set of values: the survival of the state, the survival of the people. That's the real test. That's, in some ways, what he would say, that's the religious significance of the state. How we fare in determining our behavior on the basis of the choices that we have to make. And Kibia has challenged us in the same way that he refers to Shem. That let's go back to Shem, where he sees the same tension, because the brothers raise the possibility that, number one, there is the issue of the lives of the innocent, and there's a second issue, which is deterrence and security for the family of Jacob in the land itself. So which one of those values will be affirmed? Security or our ethical tradition? Let me just finish with a quote that you don't have it. I'm sorry that you don't have it, and conclude with a quote from Moshe Una. Let me see if I have something else I want to say here in addition to Leibovitz. You'll read further in Leibovitz. Look at number 11. Look at number 11, because I think, you should see that there were religious leaders who spoke a different language. Rabbi Goren, very complicated, because later in his life, he was not, I guess all his life, he was a firm messianist. He was a student of Rav Kook, but he had a sense of restraint. He was the only rabbi I know, public rabbi, who criticized the bombing of Beirut in 1982, because he saw it as a violation of the rule that you have to leave what's Rabbi Tal. Okay, I'm sorry, but all right, you're right. Okay, but you had to leave an escape route for people, and so he writes. So now Goren writes as follows: despite number 11. Despite the explicit Torah obligation to wage war, we are also commanded to have mercy on the enemy, and even during wartime, only to kill when it is necessary for self-defense, for the purpose of conquest and victory, and not to attack non-combatants. That's all. That's what I wanted you to see, and certainly not to strike at women and children who are not participating in the war effort. We don't hear that these days. They're all guilty. That's what we hear today, right? With the exception of obligatory wars, about which we are explicitly commanded by the Torah in ancient times: you shall save alive nothing that breathes. Lo techaya kol neshama. Since what I would call the war of annihilation, since the enemies of that time also practiced cruelty, and so the Torah was stringent about that. Nothing may be learned from them, God forbid, about other wars or about our time. That is, according to Rabbi Goren, a war of total annihilation can no longer be practiced. There's no such thing, which is exactly what you hear today from the rabbis of the extremist rabbis of Gush Emunim. They're rekindling this war of total annihilation. Rabbi Goren, and this is a general understanding. It's not unique to Rabbi Goren. This doesn't apply. This applied only in the conquest of the land. It no longer applies today. There's no such category of war. Even in a war of defense, which you're obligated to fight, there's no permission that you have to annihilate the innocent population, the bystanders, right, and so on. Okay, so I did want to come to conclusion, and I wanted to read you the following. I want you to hear the voice of Moshe Una. Moshe Una was one of the spiritual leaders in Kibbutz Yavneh. Came from a German religious Zionist background. Again, unfortunately, a personality about which we know, most of us know very little. And Una, by the way, in 1952, when he wrote the platform for the Kibbutz Hadati, for the religious Kibbutz movement, one of the planks that he proposed for the platform is, what are we going to do about the refugees? Anybody discussing this question these days? 1952. What are we going to do about the Palestinians among us? And he says that's a moral issue. So he writes as follows in another passage, at least, and the heading that I have here is Moshe Una Ish Oz B'Shalom. He is a leader of the movement, the religious movement that sought peace, right? Strength and peace. Our awareness of an additional element, another nation, you don't have this source, within the land, presents us with ethical and humanitarian obligations. All right? That is, from a religious perspective, we have humanitarian obligations. When the generation that left Egypt was commanded not to hate the Egyptians because they had been strangers in the land of Egypt, they were certainly shocked. How can we not hate those who killed our children and tried to strip us of the image of God? What obligations could we still owe them? However, ethical and humanitarian obligations are not merely a calculation regarding the good of the other. They are first and foremost about ourselves. Be ethical and fair for your own good, for the purity of your character, regardless of the ethics of the other person. They say to me, meaning the response of our, you hear this in the community. What do they say to us? They say to us, the whole world is against us. The nations of the world have sinned against us. They hate us time and again. What do we owe them? Why do we have to examine every political action or practical step taken through the lens of ethics and humanitarianism? Do people ask you this? I mean, people, they say, you're naive. You're naive. Why are you concerned about them? They're not concerned about you. Why should you be compassionate in any way? My answer, right? Someone who stops examining the ethics of their actions because the other is not ethical removes themselves from the realm of the ethical as well. I mean, right? Someone who stops examining the ethics of their actions removes themselves from the realm of the ethical. It is my soul, rather than humanity, that would be harmed. Do not conclude from my words that I am naive about the true face of our enemy. We have an enemy, but that doesn't free us from our obligations to our principles. I am because our tradition will, it's not just we, our tradition will be harmed. This is the question that I end with. If we continue on this path, it's not just a self-destructive path for our own existence. It taints Judaism itself. And that's what we're talking about, how Judaism will emerge from this period. I am simply concerned with our Jewish face rather than with the face of the non-Jews. Do we preserve our principles? Do we preserve our tradition? Thank you very much.